All right, and we're live. This is Masculine Geek number 179, Fireside Chats, just for the hell of it. This was originally going to be Drew's night to DM, but Rollo, like myself, Rollo is sick. He can't talk. He's got laryngitis or some shit. And Bint is Amos has
Bent.
got Bint has got some shit to take care of in his personal life. Amos,
He's tied up and being spanked right now.
yeah, I don't even want to know. That's not something I want to even contemplate. But thank you for putting that image in our heads now. So
Well, now we know what Cappy's doing on vacation.
he's manhandling Amos. Excuse me. So like I said, I've been sick since Saturday night. I was in work yesterday, even though I felt like shit. And I said, nah, today I'm taking the day off to continue my rest and drinking Gatorade and Body Armor Light, stay hydrated. So that's why I sound the way I do, recovering. We really don't have a topic tonight, but Drew, what were we discussing? Zinc and vitamin D and
zinc
magnesium?
and quercetin. And
I got a Geek now.
really quick on that. And,
all right, cool.
I don't understand it really well. I need to do some more reading on this, but from what I understand, if you're taking zinc without also taking quercetin, it's like taking a shower while you're wearing a raincoat.
Huh.
You don't really get the
No
full
benefits?
benefit. Well, not no benefit, but not the full benefit. I mean, if you take it, you're going to get some benefit from it, but it causes more of it to be transported into the cells where it's needed. So, and I got some before when I had COVID, and when I had it, the first 2 days sucked. I was run down, headache, sore throat, just felt exhausted, coughing, the whole deal. But was taking the zinc, vitamin D, I think also C, and the quercetin, and geez, what was it? I think the NAD.
NAD.
NAC. No, NAC.
NAD.
Yeah, not NAD. I'm thinking nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. It's a completely different thing. It's NAC. And that seemed to help. I was run down for a few weeks after that, but no big deal. Started feeling the same thing yesterday, earlier in the morning, and by afternoon I felt like crap. And I take ZMA all the time anyways, and the D, but I don't really take the quercetin and the other stuff. So took some of that along with the zinc and the D, and chugged a bunch of Gatorade, and woke up this morning feeling normal. So whatever it was past.
That's good. Yeah, whatever.
Being sick sucks.
Whatever you had was knocked out by that combination of minerals and vitamins. That's cool. But it was mildly annoying.
Oh, I've got to thank you. See if I can find where it is. I ended up ordering the Means to Freedom. Got both of them right after we talked last time.
You're welcome.
I have not sat down and actually started reading them, but just flipping through. And
is that cool?
This looks good. Yeah,
it's going to be really good. Yeah, I
finishing this up, but I'll probably alternate between them.
Yep. Yeah. No, you're gonna get a lot of in-depth information and ideas and philosophies of both Lovecraft and what's his face?
Howard. And Howard. This is timely too, because I am, in addition to DMing one of our D&D games, and I'm a player now in Jeff Rose campaign, and I'm also a player in a campaign with my brother and some of the guys that we grew up with. The first group that we played with, we got all back together. Mentioned that in another talk. Right now, one of the other guys is DMing, but eventually we'll probably switch. And if we don't, I'm setting up this new campaign anyways. And even if I don't end up doing anything with it for a while, I just enjoy the process of world building. And actually, geez, we got you and TJ here. Shit, while we're talking about world building, part of the reason that this is just really timely is that what I want to do for the world that I'm building is a low magic, early medieval, post-apocalyptic setting. And part of what I'm thinking is that the apocalypse will be similar to what happened with Howard's history, and obviously heavily influenced by this, where there was some big cataclysm, and Atlantis sunk, and the whole world was changed. But it was brought about by some sort of extra cosmic beings. And so tying all of this together, so there will be kind of a blend of sword and sorcery and weird horror. And so this is going to be perfect. I'm assuming that they talk a lot about the
it's like
process.
it's like my novella series and the latest Laserdix series. Cosmic Car in the background.
What do you guys do, you and TJ, when you are writing in terms of setting up a world for the stories to take place in? Is there a process that you go through? Do you think about the world and all the stuff going on first, or is it just kind of organic where it happens and it is what it needs to be as you're writing the story?
For me, it's organic. I tend to write characters.
Right as well. So
I tend to do characters first, and sometimes even dialogue, and then the world or setting becomes what needs to be for that character to have developed, either as an outsider or as just kind of a regular person within that sphere and within that realm. So sometimes an idea for a setting comes into play, but I think because I am somewhat of a frustrated actor, although I've got an audition I'm supposed to go to later this week. We'll see how that goes for something local. I tend to focus on the character and the setting. That part of it comes easily to me because it's just organic. Because between all the books I've read on history, all the nonfiction stuff I've read, it's real easy to come up with stuff that makes sense and has a right feel for it. But that's me. I know a lot of people, the world comes first and then the characters, but I'm a character first and then the world kind of has to make sense for that character to exist in it, or sometimes not exist in it, because that's the whole point of the character, is he's kind of an anachronism or an oddball. So that's just me.
Yeah. The last book I wrote was The Iridian, which was kind of my take on taking a film noir and sticking it in Star Wars. So I actually just was inspired by the Star Wars planet of Coruscant, which is this entire city planet. So it's entirely. So I was thinking, okay, what's it like to have an entire city on one planet? You're going to have areas that are so deep down. You're going to have different levels of the society. You're going to have all this other kind of stuff where the poor live down in the slums where the sunlight doesn't reach. And then you're going to have the wealthy people who live up high enough to where they can access the actual sun and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, for that, it was actually pretty easy. It was just like, thinking you always assume, kind of like almost like on a ship, like the Titanic, where the wealthy people, the first class passengers were at the top, third class passengers were down at the bottom, and that kind of stuff. So they didn't have the access to that. And then I wrote that book, Men Who Walk Alone, but that was freaking like back in I was working on that book back in 2007, 2006, so long ago. I wasn't really thinking about that, but I definitely understood the concept of having different sections of a town and having different worlds within that town. So it depends on what kind of story you want to tell. And you can always do this thing where I call it the Boba Fett effect from The Empire Strikes Back, where you spend very little time. You can spend very little time talking about a character or going with their backstory. You can do the same thing with a world where they can make some references to that world or background, and you really don't have to go into detail of it. The reality of the world is reflected in you talking about the character.
Yeah, and the character's actions and reactions and right. Such. Yeah,
that's how my writing is for the most part. Even going back to stuff that I began writing in 2005, 2006. Yeah. I don't world build. The world for the most part. I mean, obviously, if this street or this the warehouse or the precinct, that's all. You don't have to go into detail. You don't have to go into any detail. You don't have to. In fact, with Laserdiscs, no, it's not pornographic, so don't get your hopes up. That was you got your hope or something else up. That was a play on words. It was it was over a year ago. We were talking about technology, and rather than say laser disc, I said laser dick. And like, hey, and then I thought about it, I'm like, hey, that was I'm glad I said that because that would be a good story about dick as a slang,
for a private
detective
for a detective. So I'm like, you know what? And I'm gonna turn it into a masculine geek kind of thing. It's gonna be TJ, Rob, and I. We're gonna be the laser dick. We're gonna be the dicks. We're gonna be the detectives. So I started writing it and wrote one chapter, and then when Nick August hit me up for writing for his Punch Riot magazine, I'm like, this would be perfect for that. So I submitted it. He took it, and I got paid, and it was serialized monthly or semi-monthly, and then quarterly as Nick found time to actually put the magazine together. That fucker.
And the best example of world building was you making the Manosphere a gay bar. I absolutely love that.
I did. Well, there's a reference of it. It includes Aaron Clary.
It's a gay bar. Why wouldn't it?
Why would it?
That goes without saying.
And I think Rob. I think I had Rob say, "Is it Manosphere? That bar owned by that fruit Aaron Clary?" So that there's just brief hints. Like, so the premise behind Laserdiscs is all that cool shit that they were talking about in the 50s that by now we should have lasers and hovercraft and these neat rockets
robot
and shit. Exactly. Stuff, well, they in Laserdiscs they have all that stuff in around that time, so you kind of get a sense it's like kind of a post-prohibition era gangster kind of talk kind of time frame, but I don't actually give a definitive year, and I don't really I mention a war, but I don't really tell you what city you're in. I follow the Hemingway thing of writing too. It's like writing is like an iceberg. There's a little bit at the top that's exposed, the top of the iceberg, and you see that's what you're reading. Everything else, all the stuff that I've left out is underneath, and your own imagination supplies the rest of it.
It would allow you to fill all that in. And I think what's interesting about that too is if you do it that way, then every reader is going to have a slightly different experience reading it, depending on what they envision things to be like. And this is probably one of the worst things about movies is if you have a book, when you read it, you are an active participant in the process.
Exactly.
Not in the writing, but in the interpretation of it and imagining everything. And you're going to imagine it in a way that's most exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you fill all the parts. You envision all the actors that are playing those characters in your mind.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny, Vince, the way you are doing Laserdiscs and that kind of timeless, where it's kind of the 40s, 50s, but kind of not, and kind of futuristic, but yet
there's still typewriters.
That's Walter Hill has done two different movies that are kind of like that. One of which is The Warriors, which seems like both the 70s, but is also supposed to be kind of in the future when things have gotten really bad in New York and the gangs really control everything. And then Streets of Fire, which has an 80s neon vibe to it, but at the same time
even down to
has
the music,
a 50s neon tube vibe to it. So, and again, the time is not stated specifically, so it has a certain timeless quality because it's a part of like different decades that are kind of fused together, which I think works well with you because the way you're talking about writing is very much more pulpish, which I think is where your influences and loves are from, as opposed to writing big 500-page massive tomes where you spend like 9 pages in a paragraph describing the room and the way the tables are.
No, when I first started writing, I had decided not to do that. I can appreciate that. Like Umberto Eco in The Name of the Rose, he'll spend 11 pages. He'll spend 11 pages describing a door, and that's wonderful. And even in Tolkien's work, he's very descriptive.
Psycho.
That's fine. I can appreciate that. I don't like that, and I think as readers,
it was tedious. Have you ever read Bret Easton Ellis wrote American Psycho? I remember reading it, and I get it. I think the idea behind the insane level of detail in the descriptions was to give you an idea of the thought process of the character, but it was just like, what the?
But not everyone can write that way. Umberto Eco is so poetic, and the way his words flow, he can get away with it. And it's not for everybody, but you've got a lot of people that think that's the way they want to write, and they want to be the next Robert Jordan or something.
F. Scott Fitzgerald was the same way too. His writing was very poetic, and it flows very well. I can't do that, and I'm glad that I can't, because I've found that over the years I don't have the attention span for that. And I think most readers today, with certain things, they want to get into philosophy, and that's a different niche that has a different expenditure of energy behind it. But if you just want to be entertained, I think the attention span is now different. That's why the whole thing behind a lot of people are like, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. Well, I don't think that's true anymore.
You got to get back to the short story.
Well, I'm not good at short stories either. But well, that's it. I do novellas. I do 70 to 100 page novellas. Now, before we get too far afield, because we've only got a half hour left, TJ, you said you had some Geek and Tell.
Yeah. So, as some of you know, I went to Normandy right before, like a week before the 75th anniversary of D-Day. So I got a license plate that said 75th and had all the cool stuff. I was in a war antique shop, and I found and bought this.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
Wow.
So you've got everyone but what, one?
The 25th.
25th.
Well,
Cool.
I don't know. I don't think they did that for the first. I mean, I'll find it, but another one
probably did.
So John Wayne did a film with.
Yeah.
It was a very technically precise film. It was about the PT boats in the early days of World War II that escorted MacArthur off the Philippines. So this is a really early edition. I'm not sure which year.
Kirk Douglas was in that as well, wasn't he? With John Wayne?
I don't think he was, but he might have been. I just watched War Wagon with those two, and I wasn't terribly interested. I kind of fell asleep. This one is Clausewitz is on War. So I'm interested in reading it. Though I was told that the typical translation of his line that war is politics by other means was actually not an accurate translation. So I'm going to have to go look through this book and see if that's the case. I'm curious to see what he has to say. Because, I mean, what ends up happening is they condense these guys' the books down to a couple, like, tweet-length statements. And it's like you want to read more of what they have to say because some of the stuff is probably outdated, and then you just skip it over. But then there's, you find those gems of wisdom. Like Sun Tzu's on war. His book on war. He speaks. What made his book work? He spoke generally and in like overall philosophical terms. He didn't talk about precise like tactics of the time, which makes it easily readable. And you were talking about readable stuff. I was reading Confederate war vets memoirs, very readable. He talked about stuff where it's like easy to follow. He was talking about the practical stuff. Like we started out the war with revolvers and all this other equipment, and we got rid of it all immediately because it was just not practical. I'm reading a Union guy's memoir, and his reads like a textbook. It's like or an instruction manual. It's very dry, and he's describing the time, the chronology, as opposed to the Confederate guy who was describing more of the practical stuff that I found interesting. Like, what was it like being at camp? What was it like marching in the humid, hot heat like that? And he was saying, like, it's a problem if you were doing it alone, but if you were a bunch of other guys, you distracted yourselves with talking to each other or singing songs or something like that, and you eventually just got used to the heat. He also talked about how they didn't carry it with them a lot of clothes. So the writing was just better. And so it's written about the same period. So I'm sitting there reading these books and thinking, the books are at the equal length, but one of them is just far more interesting because it was written in a more readable way. So length is not necessarily the thing. It's getting to the point and being easy to follow along as a reader. Like, what is the importance of what I'm reading right now?
Makes sense. There's no point in stretching out a story to be 500 to 800,000 pages, whatever, if you can tell it in 200 or 300
or explain
or 50.
Like, why are you I was reading one of the books. I'm like, why are you telling me all this stuff? Like, what is the importance of this like information, as opposed to the one guy who's saying, we were issued revolvers. We didn't use them because they were just not practical to use in battle. We were given these chests, these wooden chests to carry stuff around. It wasn't practical. What's it like marching in the sun? Well, you do this and you do that.
Well, he wrote the way he talked.
He wrote he
wrote the way he talked. And the other guy was just writing. He wasn't writing the way he talked, but he was writing the way he thought that the information should be conveyed.
Yeah, he probably was not a good dinner table conversationist. It's like, tell us, we had my commander. Man, when was he born? Oh, yeah, I can't remember. He was born. It's just like,
shut up.
Yeah, exactly. It's like nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
It makes me think about Tolkien. Now, I think I've read The Hobbit maybe 3 times, and I've definitely read The Lord of the Rings, the whole thing through. I read it in grade school. I read it again in high school. I read it again just a few years ago. And it's great stories, but it really is tedious at times. And
yep, I'm not gonna lie. I was reading some of them. I was like, this was written for kids. Like, come on, talk. I get it was written for a different audience from a different time period. I get it, but I'm reading some of his stuff. It's the same with some other authors.
Well, there is an issue there. It's like going back to Tolkien, even going back to far as Moby Dick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't know what a whale was. They didn't know what a white whale looked like, other than this creature is white. What is it? So the descriptions for things were necessary because they didn't have the availability of the internet. They didn't have the availability. I mean, things were very insular. I mean, some people never traveled outside their own fucking town. Did they go to school? Maybe. Chances are they were homeschooled to maybe what would be considered a third or fourth grade education level.
Mm-hmm.
So that the availability of that information, the descriptions of the world, the descriptions of those items, as it were, creatures, people, were, in some extent, were completely necessary. So I get it. Same with Tolkien. How many people? I mean, outside of like a Chinese dragon, how many people really knew what a dragon was?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I mean, now it's today, or an orc. Like we take these things for granted because we grew up with D&D. We've got television. We even had the radio at the time, but we have all this shit available to us now. That's taken our attention span and going, all right, well, we know all this crap. We know all this. Give us the watered down, too long didn't read version.
It's like Victor Hugo when he wrote Hunchback of Notre Dame. He did an entire chapter taking the reader on a tour of Notre Dame, because many of the people had never been there. There were no pictures. That was back before photographs, really. That, you know, you might see a painting somewhere, but most people didn't. So
it was like a travel documentary.
yeah, it was like a travel documentary in the written form. So I get that, and that's where I think actually, frankly, I read a lot of the classic novels I read as a kid. I didn't actually read the actual books. I read the abridged version, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I read the abridged version. When I was in college, I read the actual novel, and I was appalled. I'm like, Jules Verne, like, dude, get to the freaking point. Like, this chapter on all these sea creatures, like, nobody gives a shit.
Yeah.
Like, I'm focusing on the escape. Like, this is like, there's political philosophy, there's sociology. Like, I'm interested in Captain Nemo. I'm interested in Ned, the sailor who wants to escape, and like all this other stuff. And he's sitting there talking about all these aquatic creatures. I'm like, no, like, fascinating at the time, cool idea of the submarine, but God, like, it's just like cut out. It's the same thing, frankly, with Ayn Rand. Like, her book.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, just like cut, like, condense. Leave me alone. I own myself. Like, that's literally Atlas Shrugged. Instead, she does a 40-page political treatise and 64 novels. It's just like, yeah.
Right. So I will never read these again. I will never. I got these. I read them when I was in college. I will never read them again. I don't even know why I keep them.
It's funny. Yeah, Geeky Anomaly was noting Master and Commander is very dry. I was reading that book, and I'm like, this book is not okay.
The nonfiction is great, but her fiction is torturous.
I found it to be actually a pretty dry book. And in fact, I was reading a book recently called Torpedo Junction, which was about all respect to the author. His nonfiction stuff is his autobiographical stuff is good, but I'm like reading him like, this is really dry, because it's like, it's just way too much information. I was reading a biography on Jedediah Smith, and I'm like, this is just boring as like. It's just boring. Like, you're not telling a story. As opposed to that biography I read on William Marshall, which was so engaging, because he's telling a story, but he's also giving the context to everything that's going on in this guy's life. He's saying, here's what was going on at the time he was born, and here's all the cool stuff, and here's why they did this and why that mattered and all this stuff. And you're finally understanding, like, these people were actually human beings. It wasn't just random stuff happening. So it just frustrates me when people who are trying to write something, it's like, you gotta get us interested. Like, why should we care?
See, I enjoyed Master and Commander. I didn't think it was dry at all. But then again, I tend to do a lot of stuff within academic circles, so that style of writing doesn't bore me. But like Victor Hugo, I've always found to be ponderous, but Jules Verne, I didn't think so, despite all the exposition and descriptions and stuff within Verne's writing. Whereas Hugo, I don't know, some of that could be just the translation and stuff, maybe certain things read better in the native language, but like with, Dumas and Three Musketeers and Count of Monte Cristo and stuff like that, I've always found those enjoyable and witty, even though those are almost, in the case of the Three Musketeers, purposefully written with a very large word count, because that would make more money, the more words. So, you have people speaking in very long, elaborate sayings and stuff, but I just found it entertaining as hell, and I still do. So,
some books, like, even though it's overly wordy or whatever, I still enjoyed it. I think it was Ivanhoe. I remember reading Ivanhoe, and I liked it. Overly descriptive, very Shakespearean type language, but I enjoyed the story.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it probably comes down to the prose of the author. If they are able to describe something in a way that brings it to life, that is vivid or interesting, then that's going to be more enjoyable than just very dry exposition. especially exposition when it really doesn't seem to have any relevance to the story. It's just world building for world building's sake.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which it's kind of a backwards thing with the campaign setting, though, because if you're writing a short story, you are creating a story and you create the setting to support what's happening in the story. For a role-playing game campaign, the story emerges from the player's character's interaction with the setting. So I don't have a story. I have a setting for them to interact with, for whoever ends up being the players. And so I am taking and I've never actually written, I shouldn't say I've never written any complete story. I've started, I really need to make a point to do this because I should. I want to, I've just procrastinate too much. But with the campaign setting, I don't have any story in mind. I'm just trying to come up with ideas for what would be a cool situation for the players to find themselves in, and how can I create an environment where these kind of situations will occur, and then, well, what would require, or what would the situation require to happen, and kind of expanding from there. So right now I've just got this big brainstorming list of things that the players might encounter, situations that I would like for them to find themselves in, things happening in the world that might be interesting for them to explore. And as all of you have been talking, I keep going back and thinking
the $10 super chat. Appreciate that.
Maybe what I should be doing, because I'm not planning to. Maybe what I should do is take a lot of this stuff and maybe just start writing some short stories.
Thank you for that 5.
Wow.
Thank you for the 15.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's really cool of you.
What's it like in Jethro's game, playing on a regular basis? Because that one shot we did was excellent. Yeah.
So this is so the biggest differences, because so to be able to say what it's like how it's different. Really, when we were kids, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We had all the core rule books. And I usually DM'd. You had a friend that would DM sometimes. But the way that we ran the games was not with one-to-one time. We weren't tracking a whole lot of things. There was a bunch of rules that we didn't know. Often we're just making stuff up. It was not by the rules. We had fun doing it, but we were really doing it wrong.
Right.
In most of the games that I've been involved in, or actually I saw all the campaigns since, we have not used the one-to-one time. A lot of people hand wave the training and all this other stuff. So from what I understand, Jeffro's campaign was started to be sort of an experiment. Like, let's see what happens if we play the game rules as written, no exceptions. Everything is done by the rules, and it's everything. Track the encumbrance. Everything gets tracked. If we have combat, the players declare their actions before rolling initiative. The DM controlling whatever opponents will make a note what those things are going to do before initiative is rolled, so they're not making the decision after the players have decided. So, and then after initiative is rolled, you know that there are different order that the actions are supposed to take place in, with the ranged attacks being first, and then melee and other things. But then within that, there's also different speeds for the weapons and segment time for casting. And all of this is being incorporated in combat. And just as one example, this makes things more interesting for combat, because now you have to consider things like this, like, do I have enough time to cast this spell? If it takes so many segments, which normally, if you win initiative, you would usually have that time. But if there is a tie on initiative, then it comes down to the segment. There's also, and this has been most interesting to me, probably the biggest difference is everything is played so that there is one-to-one time outside of gameplay. So suppose that during a single session, 3 days of time have passed within the session.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next time that you would play, you would not pick up right where that left off. If you play a week later, another 4 days would have passed in game time between the end of the session and that. And where this starts to get interesting is things like travel time, where you are ending, because if you're in a dungeon, you don't want to end up being in there for however long. You want to get back out, camp and whatnot, but also with the training. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest things that's been interesting about having to, one, gold for XP, but also having to pay gold to level up and spend time training to level up, is that during the session, the dungeon master is judging how the players are playing their characters based on their alignment and their class. Are they playing the character true to these things?
They get points for that now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're being graded, with 1 being the best, 4 being the worst. And at the end of the session, they'll let you know. And when you level up, you have to have it's 1,500 gold pieces per current level per week of training to attain the next level. And how many weeks of training can be 1 to 4? 1, if you have played the character true to class and alignment. 4, if you've done really poorly, and especially with the alignment too. If you're not playing to alignment, the DM can say, well, you're not lawful good. You're maybe chaotic good, or maybe you're doing a lot of evil stuff. You're not a good character. Mm-hmm. But so there's incentive, knowing that if you're level 2, you want to go up to level 3. It's going to be your level 2 times 1,500 is 3,000 gold pieces per week to get to that next level.
Yeah.
So you don't want to train for 4 weeks and end up having it cost you, 12,000 instead of 3,000 gold pieces. So there is a stronger incentive to play to the class, but also there is a lot more incentive to go and do things that are going to get you gold. So the drive to adventure, and then the rewarding for gold really turns it into a very mercenary type thing. Hey, what jobs are available? What can we do? Is there a place that are there rumors of ruins, treasure, anything like that? So it really changes the dynamic. It's not this big high fantasy epic, we're the chosen ones and we're going to go and walk across the land to dump a ring in a volcano or something. No, it's very low. It's a high magic setting, but it's low fantasy, high magic, very sword and sorcery with some weird science fiction mixed in there, or weird fiction mixed in there. But with the training, it's interesting too, because the way that most people seem to play is they have their PC and they have their party, and this one group of players, every time they get together, they pick up where they left off, and it works for a radio show type episodic entertainment thing. But for a campaign, you lose out a lot, I think. Whereas with this, for example, I we got a shit ton of gold in the last session. We went in the last session, the one before that, we were hunting this vampire.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't supposed to necessarily kill the vampire. We're supposed to map out these ruins that the vampire and their thralls were in. But we ended up finding the vampire and said, you know what? Let's go for it. Let's try to kill it. And we weren't very high level, but we managed it. Anyways, we got lucky. It was in its sarcophagus when we found it. We were able to sneak up on it and do all that. But I got enough gold that I got enough XP to go up a few levels. Mm-hmm. And just enough that I was able to pay for the training, since played the chaotic, or not the, but yeah, chaotic.
What class are you?
Thief. Well, this is the point that I'm getting to, is that one character is a thief. But now this thief has to spend 2 weeks training. So the session only took a day. In the campaign,
yeah,
there was 1 day of adventuring in the point of the campaign. So 1 day. So this PC now, because of the training time, will not be available again for the next 2 weeks. So during the next 2 sessions, I will use a different PC. Mm-hmm. So, and everybody that plays has a few different PCs. And one time we have a session, we might be in one part of the world with one of our PCs or one group of people. In another session, we might be in another part of the world, and it's Jeffro's campaign. And he is the overseer of the entire world of the thing, but he has patron players that have high-level characters within the campaign that have their own domains. And some of these players will DM the sessions that are in their domains. So sometimes somebody will say, you know what, I can't DM this week. Somebody else will DM. So if the DM can't make it, that's not a big deal. Somebody else can DM. And okay, well, this week we're in this part of the world. And I might say, well, I don't have a PC that's anywhere near that part of the world. I'll roll up another PC. This would be my character that's in this part of the world. Or maybe I do have one. I've got 2 PCs that are in a place called Minus Mandolf. And I've got another.
Minus Mandolf.
And I've got another that is in this island in the south. So depending on where it is, I might have to roll up another character real quick. But it's more like a Guy Ritchie movie where you have everybody's got different PCs in different places. And also you can have a campaign where you have 2-3 dozen players or more, and different people DMing different nights, and whoever wants to can drop into different places. And it works because of the one-to-one time and all the different PCs. And because as long as all the people DMing, the sub DMs, the patron players running their parts of the campaign are communicating, and they are. There's a chat. Everybody's letting everybody know what's happening in their places and stuff. You can jump in at any place in this world with a character that's there, or roll up a character that's going to be there. And it works. So it allows you to have all these people involved, and allows you to have a session. Even if some people can't make it, it doesn't matter, because you're not picking up where you left off the last time. You're starting on this particular day, and well, who happens to be around that wants to go and do this thing? So a lot of the problems that people have with, oh, well, we can't coordinate our schedule. If you've got a large enough group of people, at any time, you're going to be able to get enough people together and have at least one high-level patron player that can DM in their part of the world where you can do it. And it's just also crazy because you have these different high-level patron players who have their high-level PCs that are running these domains that have their own very different concerns from the low level of adventurers, which creates a higher level of conflict, sometimes between the PCs, or sometimes cooperating against larger threats, that creates this dynamic in the background where the world is very much alive.
That's just D&D. That's just a D&D.
Exactly.
That's exactly how my group played it. because we had certain micro groups and then we had one large kind of macro group. So you had a group of us who all went to the same junior high and the same high school, and we were one group. And then one of the guy for whom I was his best man at his wedding, his cousin, who became one of my dearest and best friends, they were on the other side of town, and our two groups merged so that our worlds became pretty much the same. And so we played in each other's games. And there were several of us within that group, within the different groups, that could run a game. And we all had different NPC characters because there were certain characters we wanted to make. We couldn't because the rules did not allow you to have those as player characters, but those race restrictions or level restrictions didn't apply to non-player characters. So we created non-player characters to service different parts of our world. We had a villains campaign as well as, characters that were mostly good or neutral alignment. And the ends of those different groups, even though we were the same players playing the different characters, were often at odds. So sometimes, our characters were, trying to sabotage the machinations of our other characters, and it didn't matter because it was all about the game. And my dad and some of my brothers played, and I ran stuff for them, and that was all within that world. I had guys that I met serving in Sea Cadets, which was kind of like a naval ROTC or JROTC plus, Boy Scouts. And so I met guys going through basic training up at Great Lakes at the naval station there, and found out they played D&D, and we, talked about our characters and exchanged letters. So, after going through basic training up at Great Lakes, I'm still exchanging letters with these guys, and we're exchanging things going on in the campaign so that if one of our higher level characters was marching to war against somebody else's kingdom, we would write to each other requesting troops and send armies to fight for each other. And it was all done within the game and all done within the confines of the rules. And even at school, we were constantly talking about what our characters were doing, even when we weren't actively delving a dungeon or fighting monsters, because we were training, we were setting up our strongholds, we were doing our required services to our church or to our patron deities or the lords that we served, and the game constantly ran. And and we're talking two different groups of kids on different sides of Indianapolis, and then all the little groups attached to us, and then the larger group that merged from all of that. And that was just how you played AD&D. So when Jethro started talking about this stuff as if it was lost knowledge, it's like some of us were old enough to remember that that's how you did it. Mm-hmm. But I'm just shocked at how many people didn't do it that way. And
I wish that we had read these more carefully. And I think it's not an excuse, but I think I was probably 12, maybe 13 when I picked up the books in a hobby shop that was downtown Appleton. I had a couple friends and I that were taking guitar lessons, and we would take the bus on Saturdays down to Appleton and go and walk to where we had our guitar lessons. And then after that, we would not go back right away. One of my friend's mothers worked for the library that was just down the road. So we would just hang out downtown, and there was a hobby store that we would sometimes go to before we went to the library to get our ride back with his mom. And that is where I started getting into D&D books. And so I regret not having actually studied all that stuff a lot more carefully. We started looking at the books. We we thought we had somewhat of an idea of what we were doing, and we had a lot of fun. But I really think that we missed out then by not doing it this way. And I enjoy playing D&D, even if it is sort of episodic, and even if some of the rules are hand-waved. But I got to say, I am absolutely loving the campaign that Jeffro has going. It has just it's been just a blast every single time. And some of it is also that there is some really weird elements to it. It is fantasy. It is very sword and sorcery, but there is a little bit of humor and weirdness in it. And one of the high-level patron players,
Mandolf is Randy the Macho Man Savage and Gandalf fused together. So I mean, that's
Macho Mandolf is the high-level wizard. That's basically if Macho Man Randy Savage and Gandalf mixed,
like Elminster from the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
In fact, this character researched a spell, and the last 2 sessions, the whole temple vampire thing, some of us accepted a job that was from one of the clerics in Minas Mandolf, which is the city that he runs. And one of the things that they did before they sent us to this place using this magic mirror teleportation thing is they cast this spell on us that gave us these glasses, which are basically like the Macho Man, Randy Savage glasses, the sparkles, the colors and everything, that would grant us infravision and also protection against certain spells that would affect vision. Charm, if somebody were to cast, a ball of light and try to put it on our eyes. So there are some of these weird elements in it. And I think they have a Psi Corps, an entire group of psionics. Right. And I've heard about it, but haven't encountered them in any of the sessions yet. I'm not even sure exactly where they are or what's going on. There's a lot of, there's some of the weird, it is very sword and sorcery, but there's a lot of weird fantasy and then some pop culture humor mixed in. So it's just been a really, really fun mix of all these things. But playing by the rules hasn't made it tedious. I think a lot of people have this idea that, you're tracking encumbrance, that's got to be a pain in the butt. Who wants to keep track? Well, it's really not that hard. No. You can carry so much based on your strength.
It kind of like
you just keep track.
It also keeps you grounded. You just can't have all this shit. It's like, and it forces you to choose your priorities.
Resource management forces you to make decisions. And part of the challenge is decide, what am I going to bring with me? And the magic system is the same. I've had people that I've argued with this about who have this, their ideas about fantasy magic are heavily influenced by RPG video games. I have all these abilities and I have this much mana or this much magical energy. Why can't I just cast whatever spell I want that I know at any time as long as I have enough magical energy or spell slots to do it? Well, one, if you want to really understand the D&D magic system, you have to read
Vance.
All the Dying Earth stuff. But I think there was also some of the Zelazny in there. The Zelazny's Amber Chronicles are also in the appendix. And have you read them?
I haven't in a long time, but yeah.
Okay. Do you remember Corwin's son Merlin, the sorcerer? You remember him talking about hanging spells? So the way that works also makes sense. And I don't know if Zelazny was also influenced by Vance, but imagine that a spell is not an easy thing for somebody to cast, that you just say a few words and make a few gestures and bam, magic happens. But rather, there is a very intensive process of meditation and recitation, gestures, whatever. and you have to perform all of this work to prepare the spell so that it is ready, so that if you need it, you then only have to activate what you have prepared by saying a phrase, making a gesture, expending a material component or whatever. So the idea behind it is that you just don't just snap your fingers or do something, but that it takes time and mental effort to be able to ready the spell like a computer program. Imagine you're going to write up this computer program so that when you enter a command word, then it runs. Well, the spell is prepared, and that takes time and effort. The whole idea that the wizards and everybody have to take the time to rememorize it and meditate on it for the clerics kind of fits with this, and it makes it seem like magic is, it's effort. They've got to concentrate. They've got to do all this to prepare their spells, and it is resource management. You have to say, well, oh boy, which spells am I going to take? I know all these spells, or as a cleric, all of this is available to me, but what am I going to take? It makes you make an interesting decision, and even more exciting to me is you have a limited number of spells that you have prepared. You have to sometimes use what you have very creatively.
Yep.
I think that the constraints,
that's part of the fun.
Yeah, the constraints make it more of a challenge.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the video game analogy for magic. I think a lot of role players today, especially these young fuckers, that's where they get their idea of role playing.
Well,
from video games, and that's it's like it should be unlimited lives, unlimited magic. When the confines of the magic played on easy, let's if there's difficult mode and easy and blah blah blah, I'm going to choose easy. And that was a problem I had with a lot of the editions of D&D, the later editions. If you go back to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and you look at the class and the level progression, it is based on a meritocracy, an incentive to do certain things because your leveling was different. The thief was different from the magic user, different from the cleric, and definitely different from the paladin, the ranger, and the monk. They were a pain in the ass to level up. You had to do some serious experience point gathering to get this character class leveled up. And the problem I have, especially with 5e, is
everybody's the same.
Everyone, the experience progression is the same across all classes. And that's like, there's no incentive. It's just like, no matter what I do, whether I follow my alignment or I don't follow my alignment, if I do this or I don't do that, I'm going to get this amount of experience points.
Well, I
really
still
see,
I still see people talking about the fact that one of the things they hate about first edition is the fact that the stats were different as far as the mins and max for the sexes of the characters as well as the races of the characters.
It's too fucking
that's absolutely ridiculous. And it
makes sense.
Have you not watched what was going on in women's swimming to know that there is a biological difference? But it cracks me up that
biology dictates reality.
Yeah, and they can't grasp that. But one of the things Drew said that I thought was kind of funny is about the computer programmers and magic users, and it got me to thinking, hey Vince, isn't that one of your favorite classes to play is spell slingers?
I do because I like that sitting down and going, all right, well, I have these spells available to me, and we're gonna go do this. What can I take that could possibly help? And if it can't, how am I going to expend that in a way that could help in a different way? Like Drew was talking about, is using your spells creatively in a certain situation. That has always appealed to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I like that. Oh, sorry.
No, and I like the fact that they're verbal, somatic, and material components to the spell slinging. and having to carry around the spell book and spend meditating and studying, cool.
I think again the problem is that the early RPGs, the tabletop RPGs, inspired the video game RPGs. The game RPGs did things very differently, partly because
it was visual.
It was visual, but also was one person a lot of the times. Because the early stuff, man, I remember doing text-based stuff. I had a friend of ours, actually one of the guys we play with, had the Apple, and I think the Apple II, and there were some text-based games that we'd play on.
Yeah,
all sit around. Oh, well, do this, do that.
I remember a buddy playing D&D on the ColecoVision, I think it was.
Yeah,
the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons video game on ColecoVision.
There
was one of the guys in our gaming group, one of the guys in the East Side group, in George's group, had it. Anton was his name, who, by the way, was an African American. So yeah, black guys played D&D even back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
But there are some different design constraints when you're making a video game versus when you got a bunch of people sitting around a table. And I really think, again, you alluded to this, that this has become a problem, and that people have expectations based on video games that now carry back over to a tabletop RPG, which is supposed to be a very different kind of thing.
Well, isn't that part of how they designed 4th edition of D&D to be more like a video game?
I've never played 4th.
It's very
just what I've heard. It's very video game like, or like a miniature tabletop.
All the feats and the special abilities, and it really gave a lot of even the fighter class.
Like everybody can do
kind of like video. It gave everyone these extra feats and powers, and they all came on. You could print out the cards. So a lot of times you're sitting there with cards, almost like a card game. But the encounters, one encounter could go 2 or 3 hours because of all the rules and the feats you could play and the back and forth. Which, I mean, in some respects, I liked that. It wasn't what I was used to. It wasn't what I grew up with. But I had a bit of a hiatus between 2nd edition and 4th. I didn't play 3 or 3E or 3 point whatever, 3.5, what the fuck it was. And when I had heard that Wizards was coming out with a new edition, I'm like, oh, cool, 4th. Huge hype. It had been a few years since their last edition. And I'd gotten a game group together and we played. I'm like, all right, this is okay. It was just starting to get woke around that time too.
One of the good things
kind of fell away from it.
The one good thing about 5e, and I haven't played the 4th. I played a lot of 2nd when we were growing up. I got into it right around when the 2nd edition was out, and then didn't play since college. Just started. I think it was like 2017 or so. Got back into it. I had one of my clients was into D&D. I don't know even remember how we got on the topic, but we started talking about it, and I said, you know what, we should get a game going. But I didn't have any of the books. In fact, one of the guys that we're playing with now from when we were kids, he still has all of our 2E stuff. But so I went to the gaming store, and I was like, it's all okay, 5th edition. What the hell? And I asked the person at the counter because they also had some 4th edition stuff. I was like, what the hell? I said, it's been years since I've played. What's the difference? And he said, well, the 5e is more old school. It's more streamlined. And so I figure, you know what the hell? We'll get that. It's probably more similar to what we're doing. And despite a lot of problems with it, and just it being, I joke that 5th edition is the Fisher Price edition of D&D because it makes it so that you are a fantasy superhero. It is very much high fantasy story gaming as opposed to sword and sorcery survival horror. And you're overpowered. it's just, there's so much emphasis on balancing combat and all this other stuff.
But yet, I still think it's the most D&D
simpler.
the game's been since second edition.
Yeah,
that's very true.
It does have that going for it.
It's very true. They actually listened to their constituents when they were doing their
it would be nice
questioning of their players.
If they could take the 1E and 2E, because there's some things 2E, and I've got a list somewhere.
That's where Thaco came into play too.
Yeah,
2E.
There were some changes that were good and some changes not so much. And all of the changes that I dislike were the ones that simplified things or eliminated important elements to make it more appealing to a larger audience, even though it took out really good gameplay elements. What I wish
and really gritty stuff. I mean, they tried to take out some of the Howard and the Lovecraft to make
that was all going along the time of the Mothers Against Dungeons and Dragons. They wanted to make it more family friendly, so they took out a lot of the undercurrents of all the demons, the undercurrents of sexuality, the big tits, all that stuff they removed.
Big tits are an important part of sword and sorcery.
Absolutely.
And they belong in fantasy role-playing games.
Tits.
But
right.
I don't like descending armor class, though. It would be simpler if they had used an ascending armor class.
Yeah.
That I do like from the newer editions, instead of the combat, the tables, and instead of using Thaco, which really, I mean, the combat
almost
tables,
the same thing.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
They just table versus doing the math.
Yeah.
But that's the one thing I would like if they had an ascending armor class. But a couple more comments on Jeffro's game, since you've mentioned combat taking so long in 4E, despite the fact that we are not hand waving any rules with combat, including the morale checks, the surprise rules, and all this stuff. The combat goes really quickly. And also, and I think this is a big part of it, in combat, you don't wait until your turn to declare your action. Okay, it's the start of the turn. What are all of you going to do? You say, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And then the DM decides what they're going to do, and then you roll for the initiative. And it goes in that order. So, and every time you start at the beginning of combat, you are doing this. So you don't have one person, I'm going to do this, and then they're doing their thing, and then the other, and it goes a lot faster. Now, some of it might just go faster because they've been doing it for a while. But even incorporating rules for things like if you're matched, and then it comes down to the speed of the weapons and how many segments does it take to cast a spell. Even these things are resolved really quickly. The combat is fast. We might have several combat encounters in a single session, and they tend to go relatively quickly. And even grappling. I have seen discussions, Twitter and Facebook groups where people complain about the grappling rules being clumsy. We've actually ended up using the grappling rules several times just over the past, I don't know how many sessions. Early on, I have a fighter and a human fighter, and the group that I was with were on a ship, and we were sailing somewhere, and decided, I'm broke. I don't have much gold. I need some gold. So I challenged some of the sailors. I said, hey, I will arm wrestle, because I had a high strength. I'll arm wrestle some of you for gold. I figured it'd be really easy. We make a roll contesting the strength of the other. And one of the big, strong sailors on the board said, no, but I'll wrestle you. And how much gold do you have? Well, this is how much gold I have. And we used the rules. And there's a couple percentages that you have to look at. What is your weight? What is your strength? And these other things. The DM was able to put it together pretty quickly. And then you determine the outcomes from that. And I lost lost my gold, which sucked, but it was interesting. It was not this big, long, tedious thing. And then in another session, really stupid, my thief attempted to grapple this statue that had come to life that was attacking.
What are you channeling Bint?
Yeah,
I was trying
that was a
to
very bent thing to do.
trying
Jesus.
to grab its wrist that it had a sword in, and we applied the grappling rules to that, and I was able to get a hold of it and keep it, but not for very long.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last session, we had fought with a group of these warriors that had been hired or enthralled by this vampire to guard part of this temple. And while a lot of us were fighting, one of the characters got into a melee with the leader of this group. And so instead of using their weapons, they were grappling. They fought that way. And it was really interesting. He ended up winning. I think he kneed him in the groin a couple of times. Which
Let me guess. Your character never kneed anyone in the balls. No.
I didn't, but I would have given the opportunity. I did get a sneak backstab, and I killed their cleric with a backstab.
Ball shot? Oh, okay.
Well, maybe I did reach underneath and stab him there, but it was
Someone get a screenshot of that.
Just take this. There's actually in Sayak Kali, the Filipino martial art, they have different patterns of cuts that you go through. And there's one, and I think it's neck, and then there's a cut through the torso, up underneath the arm, and then underneath one leg, underneath the other, up. And the knife goes up into the perineum, and then you twist and cut coming up and out. No, that's it. 1, 2, 3 across the abdomen, and it's a supported cut down, splitting, and then up into the perineum. So this is a thing. And then imagine getting a knife in the perineum, and then you twist while turning out to the side and going across the femoral artery. Then it's up into the armpit. Then it's back down across. So
everything's coming out.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm trying to remember. It's been years. There's a bunch of different patterns, but I remember this one because that perineum stab. But you have a bunch of arteries down there, and psychologically, imagine getting stabbed in but not only that, but if you get stabbed and then you're turning, the knife
Twisting
is
that shit
being
right out of
turned,
there.
and then coming up and across, you're going to probably tear a bunch of things. Your pelvis has so many blood vessels going through that. You get the iliac arteries, you get the higher part of the femoral artery. Anyway, so getting off topic here, but just for you guys, the next time I have an opportunity to backstab as a thief, I'm going to stab them in the perineum instead, and then I'm going to wrench the sword back as I withdraw it.
Nice.
So,
and on that note, yes. All right, cool. Yeah, we're gonna. We are indeed. We've gone 16 minutes past the hour, and I want to keep this short because I'm fucking tired. All right, let's do a little housekeeping here. Oh, and everyone who's been in the chat, Geeky, once again, thank you for the super chats. Everyone who's been in the chat now and who will be listening later, thank you very much. We appreciate you as always. Mm-hmm. So housekeeping, Robert, where can everyone find you?
Robert Kuzlin on Instagram, Twitter, and obviously as a member of the Masculine Geek.
Drew, yourself.
They can find me at baye.com. It's BAYE.com, as well as Baye Drew. I had to switch it around on Twitter, and they can find me at if they go to Twitter and the website are the best places to find me.
All right, cool. And last but not least, Mr. Martinell.
You can find me in the arms of a redhead, a Latina, or
what's his name?
El Cappy.
He is a redhead.
You can find me at tjmartinell.com.
There you go. and I'm obviously on masculinegeek.life and here. We've got a guest next week. I'll announce that again on Twitter. She's a BDSM kink couples therapist dealing in DS relationships. So it'd be good for you definitely want to. I know that the kink thing is a little outside of the pale for you, TJ, but the DS aspect of it between men and women may be a good idea for you to participate in.
You can see him blushing.
She's got
the lighting of that room.
She's got a completely different take on the idea of what a dungeon master is.
Exactly. So we'll be talking with her. I'll release more details along the way, but it'll be obviously on the Twitter feed, so keep an eye out for that. And then following, we have my Latin Life coming on the end. I think the 20th, the 27th. I think it's the 27th of July. I have to go back and look at my Twitter DMs to talk about Latin America and Latin living and Latin women and just all things South American and how to get passports, what it costs, how to purchase property, how to maneuver. So that'll be a good talk. Though in between that, we're going to try to fit in both Rollo's and Drew's game. So keep an eye out. Keep an eye out on the Twitter feed. That'll be where, unless I go ahead and make some announcements via the YouTube comments, the YouTube community, I can also do that as well. So, all right, everyone. Until next Wednesday, TJ, take us out.
All right, boys. Keep the fires burning. Keep the lead shooting down range. Keep the wine flowing. Don't take any wooden nickels, and don't drink all the rum.
That's right.
Very much.